All right, everybody, welcome back. And in this video, we are going to be talking about Pytest. Now, in the future videos, we're actually going to be setting up a CI/CD pipeline. However, before we do that, I did want to cover Pytest because whenever we set that up, what we want to do is we want to make sure we have a proper test suite to make sure everything is working before we deploy our application. So that's why I decided to make this Pytest tutorial now. Now, with that said, to get started, we're going to need to install some packages. And we are going to install, of course, Pytest itself, Pytest X dist. And what this package does is it allows us to test across multiple cores, pretty much just speeds up testing for better performance. This Pytest Django package right here, this just gives us some useful tools for testing Django apps, which we're going to see in a bit. And then this last one, this is actually one on 2 lines here, but Model Bakery. This last one is for creating realistic Django model instances for testing purposes. So let me go ahead and install all of those. And that was quick and okay. Now, before we get into typing any real tests or anything, what we need to do is just configure this Pytest tool. So what we are going to do is go into pyproject.toml. And you see, just like before, how we configured some different tools like isort, yapf, and let me just paste this in. I'm glad you guys said that you like this paste method rather than me typing everything out because, hey, I like it too. All right. So this is what I just pasted in. And what are these configuration settings? Well, some of these are pretty self-explanatory. For example, for the test paths, all of our tests are going to be in Cooking Core. And for the Python files that we want to test, we're just going to prepend everything, the module names with test underscore, just to kind of signify which one of our files, need to be tested. Now, this one right here, you may want to include this. However, whenever I run Pytest, in addition to like telling me the output of the test, like what one's passed, what one's failed, it also gives me some deprecation warnings. And like, it isn't an error or a bug with the app. It's just like a warning that some of your packages are deprecated or some methods or functions in there. It's just kind of annoying. So I decided to hide it. Kind of just like clutters up my console. So you can have it if you want, but I decided to hide it. And then last but not least, we have these two right here. So by default, Pytest Django, one of those packages that we just installed, it uses the directory containing this manage.py script as the Django project directory. However, because we have our settings set up a little bit weird, what we want to do is we pretty much want to say, hey, don't worry about like automatically finding anything. We want to explicitly give you a path to the Django settings module. So use these two in conjunction. Even if it's working, like it automatically finds the right directory, I still like explicitly giving it that path just because, I don't know, it just feels kind of weird. That process is like happening behind the scenes and you don't really see what's going on. But anyways, this is kind of the configuration for Pytest. Now, the next thing that we need to do from here before we start writing any tests is we actually need to create something called Fixtures. Now, let me actually go ahead and create one of these and then I'll kind of explain what it is. So what I'm going to do is in my accounts app, I'm going to go ahead and make a new package called tests. Now, for all of the tests that we write, this is where they are going to live right here. However, what we are going to do to kind of prepare those tests is we are going to create a new package called Fixtures. Now in here, let me go ahead and actually give you some sample data in here. I'm just going to create a new Python file, accounts, and I'll paste this in and then talk you through what exactly fixtures are, kind of what all this is. So in Pytest, a fixture, and each of these right here are fixtures. So a fixture is a function that returns some, I want to say like a reusable bit of code that can be used in your tests. Now, each of these fixture functions, you can see that it's signified by this pytest.fixture decorator. Now, in order to use fixtures in your test, what you do is you pretty much just include the function name or the fixture name as a argument or parameter right into your function right here. So you can see that what this fixture is doing right here is it's pretty much just making a sample account. And this account has this account number, and it just has a default balance right here, and that's it. So whenever we want to use this fixture later on in one of our tests, we're pretty much just going to pass in sender account, pretty much like this sender account number is being passed in. And here you can actually see something cool that's going on. Within this fixture, it's actually made up of this fixture as well. So whenever you have an account, you of course need an account number, and that account number is coming from this fixture. And how do you get the account number? Well, you need to make a key pair, and a key pair consists of a private key, which is kind of like your secret password almost, and a public key. And so this is kind of the chain right here, but it's kind of cool to display. So this fixture is being used, again, sender key pair in this fixture to get the sender account number, and the sender account number is being used in sender account, in that this sender account is pretty much what we're going to use in all our tests. So it's kind of I don't want to say confusing at first, but it's a cool way that you can just make a bunch of reusable snippets of code to use across multiple tests, rather than creating the same thing with the same exact data, across like 50 tests or whatever. Now, another thing that I want to do just to make these imports a little bit cleaner whenever we're working with these fixtures is in Fixtures init py, I'm just going to import all of the stuff from this file right here. Now, in addition to this fixture right here, which is pretty much just a sample account that we're going to be using, I also want to create one more fixture, because in addition to just like having sample data, it doesn't always have to be data, and I'll show you what I mean in just a sec. So I'm going to go to General, and I'm going to make, again, a new test package. And in here, I'm going to create a new Fixtures package. And I can close out of these actually. Now in this one, what I want to do is I want to make a new Python file called clients. And I'm going to paste this fixture in right here. So what this fixture is an API client. And this is just a class that we can use. It's included in the REST framework package, just so we can test our REST endpoints, test our API. So again, like I said, it doesn't always have to be sample data, but it can be like a reusable class, or, well, really any reusable snippet that you want to use across your test. And just like before, in this init file, I'm gonna just include everything from this file right here. And then once I have my fixtures taken care of, what I'm gonna do now is go ahead and create a new file right in the cooking core package, and I'm gonna name this Conftest, and make sure that you name this exactly like this is. It stands for configure test, or it's basically a configuration file used by Pytest. And what we can do in here is Pytest is pretty much going to pick this up before it starts running the test. So it's the perfect place to pretty much aggregate all your filters or anything that's going to be used across multiple tests. And by the way, this file, like I said, it's like the default for Pytest. It's automatically discovered by Pytest. As long as you name it Conftest, then you don't have to like manually configure it, anything else. So now that we set this up this way, whenever we write our test, we can pretty much just use these fixtures, pass them into the functions, and yeah, it's good to go. So now let's go ahead and actually write a test. So under accounts, in test, I'm gonna make a new test file. And remember, anytime you write a test file, we need to prepend it with the name test underscore anything that we want. I'll just name this test REST API, since I'm gonna be testing some of my endpoints. And for this, again, what I wanna do is I wanna have my function name test underscore retrieve account as well. And you see that the parameters that we're passing in is sender account. And yes, it does have to be named this, because this, as you can see, was the name of this fixture right here. So basically what this reflects is this like dummy account that we just made. And what this API client is if I go back in general, then you can see that this is resembling this right here, which is just a tool, like I said, from REST framework that allows us to make requests to our API just like this. So whenever we use our client to make a request to this endpoint, which is the accounts endpoint for the sender's account, what we're expecting to get back is, first of all, a status code of 200. That endpoint should be working. And then another thing is that this is the shape of the JSON, and their account number should match their account number. The balance should match their balance, which is 20,000. And then since we didn't have any display image or display name set, then those should just be equal to blank. So now everything is pretty much set up so we can actually run our test. So how do we run our test? Well, what we could do is we can just go ahead and write a command to start running those. However, since we are going to be running our test multiple times, of course, what we want to do is head over to our Makefile, and let's see, ST. I always have to sing the ABC song in my head to figure out the alphabetical order. But anyways, what I just pasted in is this, and we are going to be able to run it by just writing make test, and it's going to run this command right here. So of course the command to run your test is Pytest, and what these flags mean, we'll kind of break them down one by one. So this V, this just stands for verbose, and again, this is just a common, it's actually a flag used in a lot of different commands. Just means like more output, just so we can kind of see what's going on. This RS right here, this is actually stands for two separate things. This R stands for report, and that is kind of it changes the summary report at the end that, okay, let me take a step back. So at the end of your test, Pytest is going to show you a summary of like all the tests, like this one passed, this one failed, yada, yada, yada. Now, that's what the report is. This S means skipped, and it can be used along with this R flag right here. So when it's used together like this, what we're pretty much saying to Pytest is, show me a summary of all the skipped tests at the end. Now this N auto, what this means is, let me pull open my PyProject TOML. So you know how we installed these packages at the very beginning? And one of the packages was this Pytest xdist, and I said that it allows you to pretty much run these tests across multiple cores. It doesn't really make sense since we only have one test right now. However, later on, I mean, in a large project, you're going to have like 100 or thousands of tests, and that's when it's really useful to speed up your test suite by splitting them up to run across multiple different cores in parallel. But for right now, what this N auto is it's pretty much an option from that plugin to say run these across as many cores as we have. Again, it doesn't really make sense right now, but it will in the future, so might as well include it now. Now this last one, show capture equals no. So by default, if your test produces any output like print statements or logging or anything like that, then what's going to happen is Pytest is going to capture that output and show it in the event that that test fails. Now here we're saying not to show that output, and it's useful in the case that your test produces like a ton of output and that output isn't very relevant to understanding why your test is failing. So again, this is optional. I don't know if it's beneficial to you or if it's like detrimental, but anyways, this is what this is. You guys can include it in your projects or not, but this is how I have my test set up by default. And by the way, if you find yourself like testing using make test, which we can actually do right now, just run make test. Yes, see, it's preparing all of my workers, figuring out how many cores I have, and then just running one test, which passed, by the way, which is pretty cool. But either way, what I wanted to say is that if you find yourself like running the test in this kind of way and you like this setup, however, you go back and you're like, okay, let me tweak this, and oh, something was failing, so let me like change one of these. What you can actually do is just like make a couple commands. Say make test, and you know, you can call this one like test detailed or something like that. And that way you don't have to like explicitly change these. And of course you would want to tag this, but either way, it's kind of getting ahead of myself. Just saying that if you find yourself like editing this often, just go ahead and make another make command. All right, so we got Pytest set up. Everything is looking pretty good. However, what we want to do to kind of prepare for some more intricate tests in the future, and also just kind of good practice, is whenever we run our test suite, we want to create our own custom settings file right here. And this is just going to ensure that we have a consistent environment with all the consistent settings every single time that we run our test suite. So in order to do that, what I want to do is if I go in Cooking Core and Projects and Settings and Templates, again, this was my template for my dev settings. I'm also going to create a new one right here, and this is a Python file. And I'm just going to pretty much follow the same naming convention, settings, but instead of dev, I'm just going to write unit test. Make sure I spelled it right, unit test.py. And in here, I'm just going to paste in this. So this looks pretty similar to our dev settings right here. However, you see one difference is this secret key, which I'll explain what we're going to do about that in a second. But either way, we are going to be populating this with some more stuff later on. But the point is, what we want to do is whenever we run Pytest, we want to make sure that it picks up this file. And that way, whenever we're running it, like I said, it just gives it a consistent environment to run each time. So with that said, what I'm going to do, since this file is right now in, well, you can see right here, Cooking Core, Project Settings, Templates, this, we want to get this file over to our local directory. And not only do we want to do it now, which we can do with this command, pretty much copy this file from wherever it is now to our local directory right here. So let me just run this. And when I do, you can see that is now in local. But I also want pretty much any developer working on this project to do that same thing whenever they're like just, you know, getting their environment started. So in that case, I'm just going to add it to the README right here. So as part of the project setup, not only do we want you to copy those local development settings, which is just whenever you're developing, but also these unit test settings over here as well. So now that we have those settings copied over, what we pretty much want to say to Pytest or to our Django application is that whenever you are running in Pytest mode, then we want to pick up these settings. So in order to do that, we first need a function to detect if we are running in Pytest mode. So for this, I'm going to go in Cooking Core, in General, and I'll put it in Utils. I'm going to create a new file called Pytest. And in here, I'm going to paste this right here. Let me expand this so you guys can see. So this is a function that we're going to use. And what this does is it pretty much says that if we have an environment variable set explicitly that says Pytest running, and of course, the value for this is going to be true, or if pretty much we're running a command and the first argument is one of these, then that means that we are running this application in Pytest mode or Pytest, whatever you want to call it. Now, because we have this logic right here, what we actually need to do is we need to create an environment variable called Pytest running and set it equal to true. And where do we do that? Well, we do it in this file right here, because remember, this is our Pytest configuration file. It pretty much gets loaded in right before Pytest starts running the actual test. So I'm just gonna import OS, and this is gonna set a temporary environment variable pretty much through the duration of Pytest's execution. So we're gonna set this. This function is going to be equal to true, but the last thing that we need to do now is we need to use this function to say whenever this is true, update our local settings path so it uses this instead of development or production or anything else. And where do we do that? Well, if you go to Cooking Core, Projects, our init settings right here, then what we can do is first of all import that function, and again that was in Cooking Core, General, Utils, Pytest, And instead of this local settings path, what we can do is we can just update this logic right here, where we can say that if Pytest running equals true, then what we want to do is we want to use this unit test setting right here instead of dev. Now, of course, whenever we are just in local development mode, then this is not going to be true. So then it's just going to pick up our dev settings as usual. Now, one other thing, actually a couple other things that I want to do is I want to add this snippet right here. Now, again, this says if Pytest is not running, then make sure the secret key is not implemented. And there's a lot of like double negative statements in here. But what this means in kind of layman's term is that unless Pytest is running, there should be a secret key set. Because of course in normal mode, whether it's production or local development, of course in Django you need a secret key for a lot of different things. However, check this out. Why is it that in Pytest we kind of want to make sure that it's not implemented at this point right here? Because even in Pytest, I'm sure we need Django secret key so like a lot of things don't break. Well, the reason that in Pytest we want to make sure that a secret key hasn't already been set, and by the way, the reason that I want to do this, one of them, is because if I am in Pytest mode and just running a bunch of tests and a secret key is set at this point, that means that like I messed something up. I'm either running in my development settings or, God forbid, I'm running my production settings. And whenever you are running in production mode, you definitely don't want to be running a bunch of automated tests and just like hitting your production database, so on and so forth. So this gives you some protection against that. However, because we still need a secret key, even in testing our Pytest environment, how do we handle this? Well, check this out. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create one more fixture file. And this is actually, well, we have two more things to do before we're done with this tutorial. We are going to go to General, Test, and remember where this fixture was? Right here, this client. Actually, let me close this. Let me close all these. All right. So right alongside this, we are going to create one more fixture file, and we're just going to name it miscellaneous. And in here, I am going to paste this fixture right here. So what is this doing? Well, this fixture it's kind of special in a way that it's used differently than the other fixtures. And that is because we are using, whenever we define this fixture in this decorator right here, we are using this auto use equals true parameter. Now, what this means is that this fixture is automatically going to be picked up every single test run without needing to explicitly include it as a parameter in those other functions. So again, this is always going to be used across all tests. So what exactly is this doing? Well, what we are doing right here is we are using this built-in override settings context, and this is part of Django's test suite. And we are pretty much saying that within this context, what we want to do is we want to provide an explicit secret key. And this is just a way that you can pretty much within your testing, you can have like standard Django settings applied to every single test. And again, this is useful to ensure that we have a consistent environment across all of our tests without having to modify our actual settings file or use any like settings keys from development or production or anything like that. So that's what this context is. In this yield keyword right here, this keyword marks the point where Pytest is actually going to be running the test. So if you can imagine that these tests, let me just actually kind of show you what's going on. So if you can kind of imagine that this yield keyword is going to be replaced with these tests right here, it's pretty much saying with these temporary settings, apply it whenever you run the test. However, just the Pytest syntax, you use yield kind of in place of where your tests are going to be ran. So actually the last thing that we need to do to pick up these settings is just make sure that everything from this file right here is just imported in our fixtures.init, and we don't need to do anything else because in our test configuration, we are already pulling everything in from this file, which is general test fixtures. And again, we already did this before. So now in all of our tests, even though it didn't really matter for that one test, but in all of our tests, and we can run this again, just to make sure nothing breaks, we now have our consistent, unique, like temporary secret key set. And later on, just kind of a heads up, we're actually going to be adding more settings in here. But yeah, for now, this is the basic structure of how you can set up Pytest, and a lot to it. But the cool thing is from here on out, we pretty much just have to add more tests, and everything else is going to be configured more or less. So yeah, thank you for watching. And in the upcoming videos, what we'll do is, now that we have some tests that we can kind of make sure that our application is working as expected, I think we're ready to move on to some of the CI/CD. So looking forward to that, and I'll see you next time.